book friends that think good.
What does this mean for our life, for our world? Yiggity yeet, my dude. I'm happy to speak. Always happy to think.
I don't know how to do that. I can look into that.
Makes you sound like a book friend that can think good.
It's Jack and it's Weston.
BFTTGs. Yeah.
Jack, I think good. Sometimes I good think, too.
Makes you sound pretty good.
We might want to make it more concise. We are going to attempt to grapple and answer 3 questions. Number 1, what did we learn? Number 2, what did we disagree with? And number 3, what are we going to do about it? I am ready to roll.
I'm in it. Weston, my book friend, tell me, what book is it that we're thinking good about today?
Peachy Cola. Tastes so good.
About to get some of that peachy cola.
I kind of want Peachy Cola.
Yeah.
After reading this, I was like, the market share is up for me with Peachy Cola.
I am in. I'm going all in.
Book friends, you heard it here first. I love Peachy Cola. Okay, so
today we are talking about hijinks with how numbers are reported. Chapter 4 of the Field Guide to Lies and Statistics by Daniel Levitin. And Jack, you want to go through the subheading so we kind of get an idea of what this chapter talks about?
Yeah. So he is basically just addressing a number of tactics and tricks that we can train our eye for to help us sort of see how reporting numbers can be done in misleading ways. So he opens up just with sales figures, and he talks about that for a little while as kind of like the introduction. And then he gets into like some specific ways that numbers are reported erroneously. Plotting things that are unrelated, which I thought was hilarious. I love the example there. We'll get into it later. Deceptive illustrations, talking about infographics and cartoons a bit. Interpreting and framing, which was probably the longest section. And then differences that don't make a difference. And interpolation and extrapolation. Mm-hmm. Whoa. Okay. He has a ton here. Precision versus accuracy, comparing apples and oranges. So comparing unrelated things. Okay. Psych. Comparing apples and oranges is the longest section.
Yeah. I think that one's the
and
longest.
Then I think, the last one is specious subdividing, which reminded me that specious is a good word. I should use that. But basically, what specious subdividing means is segmenting data in ways that benefits your narrative.
Yeah.
Let's start just with learnings. Weston, what'd you learn from this section?
Again, a lot of this was like stuff I've seen before. Good reminders. I think my first note wasn't until page 48, really. Mm-hmm. So the first 5 were just kind of setting up the chapter, showing us, Peachy Cola, double y-axis stuff that he kind of talked about from last chapter. Mm-hmm. But 48, when I flipped the page and saw that he actually included the, like, how Apple had manipulated their iPhone sales chart, I was like...
instead of reporting quarterly sales, they report cumulative sales, which hides dip in market share or decreasing sales in the quarter and makes it just look like positive gains.
Yes. So when he showed that Apple did that, I was like, I love that. I was last chapter I talked about I wish he had better real life examples. The first real life example here I thought was like perfect because everyone knows iPhone, everyone knows Apple.
Yeah. There you go. It hides, and if you look at that graph really closely, I don't know if you noticed this, Weston, but I just looked at it for a little while, and it hides a number of bad quarters, I think. Mm-hmm. It's like sales are up and to the right? That's what I mean. It's like
it's hiding like the second quarter of 2012. It looks like it's hiding. Looks like maybe the second or third quarter of
2013.
Yeah. So they definitely did it for a reason.
Yeah.
And then I just thought like the next part where he talks about plotting things that are unrelated, that's like, a classic trope. And he didn't use I thought he was going to go with the classic one that I've always heard with ice cream sales and shark attacks. But he used ice cream sales and people wearing shorts.
I love the example he used, which was number of people who drowned falling in a pool and number of films Nicolas Cage appeared in.
Yeah, like those things are very obviously connected.
Yeah.
Conspiracy?
It's
no, reality.
It's hilarious how close that matches. And one of the things I thought when I saw that graph, I was like, who found this?
Yeah, who thought to plot these on the same?
How'd you even find it? It had to be an accident. Just that, like, what? Oh, these two things are related.
Yeah, because they are like really surprisingly close.
Yeah, which actually got me thinking about plotting things that are unrelated. There are a couple of points that are actually kind of similar to that. Like, I feel like some of these subdivisions are kind of like the same thing, but reskinned in a different way.
Yeah.
Like, unrelated and apples and oranges are kind of like two sides of the same coin, but they're really different things. Like, apples and oranges are things that are different, expressly different, but could be maybe in the same category or whatever. And unrelated just means they're totally unrelated.
I thought he should have titled the apples and oranges amalgamation, because that's what it talks about in that section. It talks about how to amalgamate things into different bins. And then basically talks about the opposite of that in the specious subdividing. So he talks about how you can combine things to make it look a certain way. And then he talks about how you can divide things even further to make it look a certain way at the end. So I agree. The apples and oranges was, I thought, maybe a weaker subtitle, because it is very close to the section before that when he's talking about plotting things that are unrelated.
Yeah. I think probably what was your favorite section?
So on page 51, I wrote down, Levitin is an absolute savage, and I love it. So he, at the very start of Deceptive Illustrations on page 51, infographics are often used by lying weasels to shape public opinion, and they rely on the fact that most people won't study what they've done too carefully. And I was like, dude, this guy just just casually calls all these like infographic makers lying weasels, and I love it.
Yeah. He's like, is your profession marketing? You are a rodent.
Yeah.
Vermin.
I did, however, have like a slight pushback here, because then he includes kind of like what I am assuming based on the graphic here, kind of a made up infographic with the dollar being cut on page 52. And I would have liked a stronger real life example. There.
Yeah. I agree with that. I actually pushed back at that section as well, because it was the one section where I thought that was maybe a little bit unfair of a critique.
Yeah.
Because I think that the assumption that he makes here is an unnecessary assumption, which is that anytime anything is presented visually with numbers, it's meant to be taken as data interpretation.
Yeah. And I don't think that's the point of these political cartoons.
Exactly. This to me is a political cartoon. It's not meant to be a to-scale graphical representation of something. And so it's kind of like, I think that the Bible falls into this kind of issue before, and we talked about category errors, where things are not always assessed appropriately because they're not respected for what they are, right? Like with the Bible, there are multiple genres of literature in the Bible. It's a collection of writings. So to apply the exact same interpretive techniques to a letter written to a church that you would to poetry is really inappropriate. I mean, we wouldn't do that with our own poems, right? Like, you wouldn't read a card that you received in the mail the same way you would read a love poem from a significant other. Like,
or just to assume that it's all fact in those poems too. Like I think that's a common thing that happens with arguments against the Bible. Is like, well, it's written in here, it's fact. It's like, well, I don't think that was even the point at that time. So
yeah, right.
Why don't you slow your roll there? Especially, as a teacher, it's like, dude, I've seen fifth graders and sixth graders write poems that, I don't know, I guess it's proved to me that like very early on, we have very analogous and symbolic thinking. in our heads. So
Yeah.
I
So
agree
one of my,
because he throws the infographic makers under the bus, right? But it's like exactly what you said, where it's like, well, the point is to get, because this is not a graph. There's no y-axes, x-axes. Like, it's not trying to show you specific data. It's trying to get a certain point across. And I think you can argue with the point that it's trying to get across.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I don't think it's meant to be taken as literally as we can assume graphs should be taken. Like graphs, when it's presented as a graph, we're meant to interpret it very literally, very specifically. And I think that this is just a different, it's an art, really.
Yeah.
Like we said,
well, and
it totally struck me as this is a political cartoon, not an infographic. I consider an infographic like kind of those flowchart things. Like those are infographics, or infographics that have more statistics, that can have like pictures that represent what the stat is talking about, but then show how this statistic might be related to this statistic. So I thought his example here was pretty poor. Yeah.
Like infographics to me are just graphs that use different iconography than what you standard see in a standard graph, right? Like instead of people represented by bars and lines, you see people represented by little people icons, or something like that,
or like a little person next to it or something. Like it's kind
So
of in between this example he gives and a graph.
It was pretty savage though. I do like the not pulling any punches. I also really liked that section. Probably my favorite line, because I think that this is something that everybody can employ. And probably my favorite section here was interpreting and framing, where he talks about water consumption in California.
What page are you looking at here? So
I'm talking about the section from 53 to 55.
Okay.
So like water consumption in California, and like people getting blamed for like using a ton of water. But like the question is like, well, is it per acre? Is it per capita? Is it per household? Is it per individual? Like that makes a big difference. The framing makes a huge difference. And the funny example that I liked was Colgate, which is like 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Colgate. What they fail to report to you is that 4 out of 5 dentists recommend all of these other toothpastes as well, not just Colgate.
Yeah,
so, like,
dentists are just like, please use toothpaste, and Colgate's like, they said to use ours.
Yeah. It's like, use toothpaste. All of these are fine. These are all toothpastes. If you have trouble identifying them, here are the brands. No, but I think that's something that we encounter a lot, is like marketing companies love this kind of thing. Like he talks about access, like people saying like 100 million people have access to Comcast. Like doesn't mean 100 million people are using it. Like it's just like that's how many people have access. And he said he uses the example like access is a word that people often use that indicates they're lying to you.
Dude, actually that relates to last chapter when I was talking about that graph. I'll put it up again. That graph that my district put out. You could say, saying this just made me think of this. You could say that they included, because this is what they did do. They included every staff that they have that could be a teacher, but not all that are, right? So like that, the nurse that they included, she is certificated. Like if she was forced to, she could teach a class legally, but she doesn't have a class right now. So that's exactly what the district was doing. In terms of framing, they were like, well, here's all the people that work in our schools that could have their own classroom. And if you include that, it decreases our class size. But not all of them actually do.
Yeah, they are air quotes teachers.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And they have the certifications to do so. Yeah. So that's,
that's fair. Yeah. So that was my favorite section, my biggest learning. And I think it was just directly applicable, because it's like, oh, I can consider frame. That's like fairly easy to do, is be like, well, what's the context for this, right? Like that's a good question that we can apply to data when it's presented to us.
Yeah. My biggest learning, and I'm going to read off a quote here on page 63.
Okay.
I'm trying to see where it is on it's the last line on that last full paragraph. So it's near the bottom of the page on page 63. This was my key takeaway. An important part of statistical literacy is recognizing that some statistics, as presented, simply cannot be interpreted.
Ooh,
And I tend to think, like, I think one of my things that I'm thinking more critically about as we read this book is, like, I tend to think everything is, like, important and valuable. Like, every number that we could deduce or measure has some value in some way.
Yeah.
And I've been learning in the last few years that it's like, that's just not the case. Like, there are just things that we just need to let go of. And I need to be able to let go of stats that I saw just because I saw them. You know, like, every stat that I see is not important or valuable, and every number that we can measure is not important or valuable.
That can also take our eye off the ball in a big way, I think. Here's a really good example that I can cite from my experience. Customer satisfaction is often given a number value, but I would argue that is something that can never truly be measured. You can measure it in a number of ways. You could do surveys, you can do reviews, you can do ratings, whatever, but there's so many variables at play there. Who are the people who leave reviews? Are they satisfied customers, dissatisfied customers? Do they have incentive to leave reviews? Are you more likely to get reviews from people who use certain devices, right? Like, there are all of these variables that make that data essentially useless in my mind.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side, I think that data can make us lazy, where we say things like, oh, well, we have 99% customer approval rate. And one of the areas where I think this is really challenging is, like, I've talked before about putting metrics to church work, right? And, like, at one point we were, like, trying to develop things because we're just trying to, like, develop a workflow for ourselves. It's like, well, how do we work with people? And just over the course of the spring, my co-pastor and I started talking about it. We're like, I don't think we should even worry about metrics. Like, why are we trying to measure something? Because all of the effort that we're putting into measuring takes away from doing the thing, which is, like, you can measure customer satisfaction in your business, or you can, like, try to figure out some nebulous way to measure people's, like, spiritual development or satisfaction in life or something. Or instead, you could spend an equal amount of time just treating your customers like people, like initiating a business culture that's like, yeah, I'm not worried about business satisfaction because all of our employees know that, like, it's important to satisfy our customers. Really good example I read of this when I was doing my MBA was Nordstrom. Like, they were just like, any bad customer interaction is bad, period. Like, if any customer is dissatisfied, you might as well consider the whole day or shift or whatever a failure. So they pressed really hard into, like, make every customer satisfied. I think, like, wow, that's really interesting. That's very simple. It throws data and analytics out the window. Instead, just says, like, to do your job is to satisfy customers.
I think that's very valuable. As an outsider, I would guess that, like, customer satisfaction data in particular is, like, very, very skewed towards the outliers. I would think that would be a very clear example of, like, a bimodal distribution, right? Like, most people, if they're satisfied with your product, aren't going to do anything. And I get things all the time in my email where it's like, hey, you get it from Amazon, review this product, you just bought it. I'm like, nah, I don't need to. I'm like, it does what I wanted it to do. Like, I ordered, I don't know, rubber gloves. I don't need to review these rubber gloves. Like, they're rubber gloves.
One of the things you'll sometimes see, because I looked at this quite a bit actually when I was working in a company where we had lots of products. Large companies or national companies have all kinds of tips and tricks and ways around reporting negatives, right? So
that too.
they're skewed positively, but local businesses on Google often have bimodal distributions. You'll see a local restaurant, it's like a 2.9, and that's because it has 45s and it has 41 stars.
Yeah.
Like, I'm always curious to see that. Like, I recently was looking for a body shop because I had a little fender bender on my truck, and I was looking for mechanics, and I saw so many bimodal distributions, so many that were like, these guys are great. these guys are terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, dude. And like, well, especially nowadays too, especially on like, um, God, where was I? There was somewhere where it was some like trendy new restaurant or something, and you needed to. They didn't want to have any paper menus because of COVID concerns or whatever. So you had to do the QR code, and then when you did the QR code to see the menu to this place, it didn't let you continue until you gave it a 5-star review.
Oh, okay. Great.
And I've seen that on a
Nice.
few apps and stuff too, where it's like it constantly asks you and it says leave us a 5-star review, and they'll incentivize it. Like you get $5 off if you give us a 5-star review. You'll get whatever. So it's like that's also a thing where it's like they're gonna try and get you to give a really good review. Where from my end it might just be like I just want the $5, or like I just want to order your food. 5 stars, whatever, and like no comment.
Yeah. Amazon will deactivate listings for that.
Yeah.
It's a fun fact.
Yeah.
But no, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that just what you brought up is such a good point. Some things just either can't be measured or can't be interpreted.
Yeah.
Like you can collect all the data you want on certain subjects and it will never matter.
Yeah. Well, because it's like also when you think about like, so we've created and measured more data in the last, whatever, decade, 5 years than has ever been recorded and measured in human history.
That's right.
Until that point. And it's just expanding more and more. So it's like every day there's just all this data. And like, I think we've talked about this previously where it's like there's a lot of times where it's an autopsy instead of like moving you forward and giving you insights. There's a lot of times where data is just like, that's what happened and there's nothing you can do about it at this point. Right.
Right.
And it's really hard to get timely data that you can actually use to shift. But anyways, that's probably another discussion. Probably comes up later in the book.
Yeah. A really common word that I hear thrown around in the business world is postmortem.
Yeah.
People say like, oh, we did a postmortem, which really just means you crunch the numbers and like have ideas for what you could do different. But I think that idea that we live and die by data is very subtly presented to us. And I don't think that's necessarily helpful for us.
Dude, I don't think it's helpful at all. It goes back to our discussion last book with Atomic Habits and a little bit to Sapiens that we read, where it's like, it's not necessarily the best thing to have an achievement or measurement focused life. There are more important things. They're like, life is bigger than numbers. In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do about this chapter? What are you going to do about it?
Oh man. So I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts. What are you going to do? Let's start with you. My
takeaway was pretty simple. Kind of going back to when he talks about amalgamation near the end and subdividing. I felt like that's an area that I might have missed. So I want to be double checking bins and subdivisions when I'm looking at graphs and really have a better eye for the details on there and see where they might have amalgamated or subdivided speciously, as he says.
Yeah. I think one thing I'm prone to doing in life comes from the section on interpolation and extrapolation. Interpolation is filling in the blanks between 2 points, and extrapolation is, carrying things out. I think that one of the things I realized as I was reading that, and he uses an example of coffee cooling, right? And he says, like, if you extrapolate this, like after, like, his coffee cools from like 160 degrees to room temperature in X amount of time. And he's like, but if you extrapolate this, it looks like it approaches zero and then like eventually negative. And it's like, that will never happen. It's limited to room temperature. And I just think like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I think that's an error that I have made many times in my life, just in simple ways, extrapolating things out, right? Like, oh, if I continue on this trajectory in life, like this will happen, or like we should expect these results, right? Like, and I can't think of any like specific examples off the top of my head, but that to me was something that I wanted to keep in mind, was like, how am I filling in the blanks? And like, am I taking things to extremes when maybe there's limits that like just never hit those extremes?
I used to extrapolate way too much with like fitness goals. Whether it be, weight I was trying to lose, I would like, calculate it and be like, all right, if I eat all this and do all this, I'll lose half a pound a week. And then in exactly 10 weeks, I'll be at the weight I want to be at or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I would do things like, all right, so I'm trying to train for strength. If I just can increase my load, 5 pounds a week or whatever, if you're familiar with starting strength and Mark Ripito, get your fives, hip drive, if anyone knows that. But anyways, it can't continue forever, right? It cannot continue forever. There's going to be some limiting factor, your metabolism or stimulus to fatigue ratio when you're lifting, where your body is going to, like your tendons are going to get to a point where they need to rest more than your muscles. So yeah, I think I learned that lesson a few years ago when I got really, really down on myself for extrapolating, or because I thought that was sustainable, and then I wouldn't reach my goal, and I'd be like, what did I do wrong? Instead of looking at like, well, what were the limiting factors that I didn't take into account?
I recently encountered an error in interpolation too, that I can give an example of. I had a friend who was talking about feeling sort of jealous of another person, and I was listening to them and realizing like, that's an interpolation error. And the only reason I thought that is because I just read this, but I thought like, well, this person, I think this is something that happens with Instagram, social media, right? You see these things and you think like everybody else in life is on this positive upward to the right trajectory, right? They don't see the dips.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we should be mindful of in our lives, is like, just because you don't see a dip doesn't mean there wasn't one. And to be wary of that interpolation that we can do with others. Like, we're hard on ourselves and then easy on others sometimes. And I think that can be to our detriment.
Totally.
Likewise, I think like there's a fallacy in extrapolation where like we see a dip in somebody else and we can be judgmental, when the reality is like they might be on a really good curve in their life that's going in a positive direction. And so just kind of a reminder to me to withhold judgment, and also to like let go of like small peaks and valleys and stuff like that. So just sort of something I was thinking about philosophically as I was reading this chapter.
Totally. I mean, I know personally I've done both, right? Where I've gone the other way too, where it's like I've looked at myself and thought I'm not making the progress I could, but then I've looked at myself too and been like, I am failing, and thought that I was failing more than I actually was. I wasn't seeing the upward trajectories. I was extrapolating poorly when I was actually, on the right trajectory. So we can go both ways on that too. It's tough, man.
I had a parent friend of mine recently do this in a way that was like really funny. They're just like spiraling. They saw their kid did something and like they were like not what they wanted. And they're like,
what
are they ever going to go to Harvard? I'm like,
oh gosh.
Oh man.
Yeah. You can't put that track on your kid too early. Jeez.
Right. Yeah. But, but then we talked about it.
Yeah.
And I was able to like talk them back off that. Like, one, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Two, it's a blip. It's not a big deal.
That's good.
Thank you for joining us, book friends. Next week on the BFTTG pod, Jack and Weston, they're thinking good some more with you, our book friends. Check out the show notes or the description, comment section for a link to the book and any articles that we talk about in the show. Bye-bye, book friends.
Bye for this time, guys.
Do a good thing today.
I love you.
Love you too, dude.